what technology is doing to us is it is basically creating confirmation bias 2.0, which is horrible because it's making us much more entrenched in our viewpoints and much less open to conversations about differences.
One of the things I teach people is that the amygdala is, going to protect you, as you know, that's its job. But it is a little bit like a over-worried mother, and it tends to make small things really, really big or dangerous instead of overriding it by saying yes to things and figuring it out later, looking at opportunities, being in momentum and inertia. But if you're not clear on what you want in life, which you're obviously very clear, it's easy to say yes to things that later you have to say no to because you're not clear. So you say yes to things very quickly in those categories, and I'm imagining it allows you to be super intentional and feel like you're on purpose most of the time. That makes sense?
Absolutely.
So how can people get more clarity? How did you get to that place where you were so clear at this very young age that those are the things you were going to focus on?
Well, I almost died, which I hope nobody listening to this has to go through. I mean, in my experience, it was very, very different and very painful than what most people have to go through. So I was really lucky at the age of 23, almost jokingly, I bid on a contract with the Department of Defense, not bombs, missiles. This was a software development deal that I bid on with a couple of guys I was friends with. And then I won it and was not expecting to win it. But, at that point in my life, Rock, I was really a selfish, obnoxious, materialistic guy. I didn't ever want to get married. I never wanted to have a family. All I really wanted was to accumulate stuff for the purposes of having stuff and being able to show to others how important I was. And then I was in a car accident in which I broke my spine, suffered severe internal injuries, and nearly tore every ligament in my neck. And so what's really interesting, there's a lot of research in neuroscience about near-death experiences. And so you kind of hear this cliche a lot. People will say, oh, I saw my life flash before my eyes. That's right. Not really what happens. What happens to a lot of people, and we have records of soldiers, going back to World War I talking about this, is that the brain is your friend most of the time. And what it does when it thinks you're in severe danger, imminent danger, like I was going through, is that for me, and a lot of people, it slowed time down. Kind of think of like Neo in the Matrix the first time, like they refer to that as bullet time, right? When he's kind of floating and he's looking, turns his head to the right and he sees that bullet whizzing by him. So in this accident, upon which I made a left-hand turn, a car slams onto me full on, my airbag goes off, I'm sent into oncoming traffic, I get hit again and then sent the other way and ultimately slam into a telephone pole, which is what stopped my momentum. Maybe 3 seconds. Maybe. And yet in that amount of time, it felt like an eternity to me, where I had this realization that I was about to die. And it wasn't one of these, dear Lord, if you let me live, I promise I'm going to give, presents to boys and girls on Christmas. It wasn't like that. I knew I was going to die. And so my immediate thoughts turned to my family, who's about to get this call and ruin their Saturday and the rest of their lives, that I was dead. And then it turned to shame, because I realized that all of these things that I was pursuing were really like, I can't take the car and the watch with me, and partying really doesn't, there's no legacy for me, right? So I really had all of those thoughts, and it was such a surreal experience. Like all of this is happening as my center console's crushing into my rib cage like a empty can of Coke or pop, depending on what part of the country you're from. And I'm seeing these shards of glass from my windshield floating in the air, and the light from the setting sun kind of refracting on them. And I'm just like, man, like this is a horrible way to die. And what a horrible person I was. And so it was really out of that kind of reshaped my purpose in life. I eventually, walked away from that business that I had, went back to school, which was also intimidating to me. I mean, I was in my 30s when I went back to school, and I'm sitting in the classroom with a bunch of these, kids. And, now I have graduated with probably too many degrees, but you know, at the time that was kind of reshaping my purpose. And so, you know, for me, it was, some of this was kind of accidental on purpose. You know, one of the things that helped me really reframe everything that I was doing was I went to a grocery store in about 2003. And if Instacart had existed back then, I don't know what I'd be doing today. But I mean, I had to go out and get groceries, and I overheard two women talking about their teenage daughters on social media. And I had a background in networking, security, and technology, and I went and spoke to them. And that was really the first thing that helped me reframe what I was going through, and, you know, really making sense of how to apply this expertise that I had, but in a way that was more meaningful. And so that was really starting to shift me towards alignment. And I think that's a question we all have to ask ourselves. And there's a technique we use in psychology called the miracle question. And the miracle question is one of these things where I would ask a patient, and I'd ask them to close their eyes and take a deep breath. So if you're driving, don't do this, please. But the question I would ask is, if I gave you a magic wand and you could do anything in the world that brings you happiness, what would it be? You know, and hold that in your mind. The magic wand removes any and all limitations. There's no money issues. There's no time issues. There's no people telling you that your ideas and dreams are unrealistic or stupid. When we get into that place, to bring it back to the reticular activating system, our brains start moving with intentionality to try and find a way to make those things happen. So if you're focused on those things that bring you pleasure, if you're focused on the things that bring you fulfillment, that bring you excitement, your brain neurobiologically is going to start focusing on those things. And when you focus on those things, you then can develop a plan to bring them into reality. I tell people that, you know, the best combination is to find something you're passionate about, that thing that you're passionate about can help others. And if you can find a way to make a living doing it, there is nothing better in the world than that.
Wow, that was a lot of gems there. I'm going to see if I can unpack some of that for everybody. Rule number 5 in my book, Your Epic Life Blueprint, is about focused energy. And you talked really about that focused and purposed way of being. And when you really know what you want, then the universe, the reticular activating system, kind of brings you the resources and brings you the people and brings you the tools. The interesting thing I thought you talked about at the beginning of that is something that I've learned recently, is that adversity forces a decision. And the adversity of your car accident forced a new perspective on life on you. I call it a triple E, an extreme emotional event that gives you a new way of looking at the world. Help the listeners force a new decision because most cases the mind and body don't want adversity. But I say that successful people choose their pain. The Rock works out on a regular basis and forces pain, becomes a bigger version of himself. He's a likable guy, most successful guy in Hollywood today. Most athletes, most CEOs, etc., they choose to get up early, have disciplines, etc. They force themselves to be in an adverse situation, which creates growth. And growth actually creates a certain level of fulfillment because you're being a better version of yourself. How does the average person, if that were a thing, get themselves to be in a situation that's not a car accident, but that's going to force some growth? What would you suggest?
What I would suggest, and I agree with what you said about adversity can cause change or force change, but I would also apply another piece to that, and that it's the perception of fear and pain.
Yes.
Force change. And so a great analogy would be, if somebody wants to lose weight, they can stand on a scale and see that they're 15 pounds overweight. They cognitively, consciously understand that their clothes don't fit the way they used to, that they don't like the way they look in the mirror, and that there are potential health consequences with that. And yet, when given the opportunity to go to the gym or throw in another bag of, microwave popcorn with caramel or whatever, they choose option B. And why is that, right? It is because the pain or fear of pain is not yet great enough to force them into action. So what I would say to somebody who is
to use your words, the perception of pain of a workout.
Yes, well, that's
right?
part of it, right? It's the perceived pain, and so we're often fearful of making change. I alluded to this, but I didn't go into this. I stayed and worked at that IT company doing the defense contracting for almost 2 years, miserable, increasingly miserable every day, because I was terrified of what was on the other side of walking away from it. And so when I finally got the courage to make the change, it was because the pain was affecting me physically. And that was probably the only time in my life that I can reflect where I've ever been really, really depressed. So, you mentioned people that have these success habits, people like The Rock and CEOs who force themselves to do things. So there's a number of variables that come into play here, Rock. Number one is, to get the mind into a place that excites us. So a lot of times people can get excited about what could be on the other side. And it goes back to that miracle question. So if you were to have a success routine, what could it look like in your life? 3 months, 6 months, a year, 5 years. So what does that look like? And you really get the brain starting to visualize what that next version of you looks like. Because remember that the brain doesn't really know the difference between something that's actually going on in your mind or something that you're fantasizing about. Now that can work both ways. And then the other flip side to this, and everybody is kind of motivated differently. Some people, are motivated by, the golden carrot, and some people are motivated by fear. And you really have to have good insight into yourself as to what will be the first thing that spurs you on. But for some people, so I'm a dad, right? So I have 2 children. If I was that person who desperately needed to lose a lot of weight, I would think about what would happen to my family if I continued on the path that I'm on and I died because I had a heart attack because I didn't take care of my physical well-being. And so for some people, really spending some time, and I'm not a person who loves to spend a lot of time in any kind of negative, but this might be the spark plug. If you resonate with, what would be the consequences? What are going to be the consequences on your marriage if you don't attend to your spouse and refuse to shut that laptop and are, continuing to work? So whatever motivates you, whether it's getting excited, it might be a combination of both. It might be, what are the consequences if I don't do this? What are the rewards? And focusing on those, because once you do and you start putting that down on paper, and you're a goals guy, so I know that you do this. Once you start formulating a plan and you then start reinforcing this in your day after day after day, this becomes habituated. And remember that our brains like things to be exactly where they are. The term is homeostasis, right? So basically, kind of like the thermostat in your house is trying to keep it at whatever. If you set your temperature to 77 degrees, that system is going to do whatever it has to do, either blast with hot air or cold air, to keep things exactly at 77 degrees.
Right.
And our brains do the same thing in terms of our lives. Our brain likes things that are same. So if you want to make the change, you have to be really mindful, and you have to be very specific, and you have to be repetitive and diligent about reinforcing the new behaviors, the new things you want to focus on. And then those changes will start happening.
So I'm interviewing Dr. Richard Schuster, who is a wealth of knowledge, and we could probably talk all day long, but I want to take you back and ask you a question you've heard before, but with a twist. So if you could go back to when you were 21, what would you tell yourself? But I want you to keep in the context the raging change with, artificial intelligence, technology, because we are so affected by that. When you talk to Gen Z, they talk about how it's easy for them to grow up with, an iPhone in their hand and to manipulate all that, where even the millennials are resisting a little bit change. And they're like, oh, well, I just wish it was the way it was, homeostasis, blah, blah, blah. The change is so rapid. What would you do differently? What would you say to yourself, 21, in today's world?
So it's a fun question for me in particular because my doctoral dissertation was on the impact that technology like social media has on personality functioning. So
Wow.
it's a topic that I speak on quite often on stage and on other podcasts. And so I just want to say very quickly a couple things, if I may,
Yeah,
about what technology is doing to our brains before I answer that question directly.
go for it.
We're living in an era for the first time in our lives where we are in a 24-hour customized information cycle. And notice I didn't say news media cycle, although that plays a part of it. And so I'm not getting political here, but what I am saying is that we have research that suggests that we are basically creating cognitive rigidity in ourselves. And what I mean by that is there's a concept called confirmation bias in psychology. And what that means is you basically have a position, whatever that position is, whether it's right or wrong, and you will take environmental data to support your position.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first research for this really came out as it relates to narcissism, because historically in a pre-technological or pre-social media age, I shouldn't say, it's not like we were living in the dark ages, but before social media existed, what would happen with a narcissist that presents to see a therapist or a psychologist is that they would suffer what is known as a narcissistic injury, something traumatic, significant that happens in their world, such as getting fired from a long-time job, or coming home and seeing that their wife has left them and there's a letter that says you're a horrible person. And so those people would usually show up only in those type of situations. Well, what's happening now because of Facebook and other platforms like it is, what do you do if somebody has a dissenting view from you? Click unfriend, unfollow,
Yeah.
right? And so we saw this in the last election cycle. And again, not getting political, but to say that for the first time, you literally had people in extraordinary numbers saying with, oh, you like Trump? I can't be your friend anymore. Click. Oh, you're a Hillary supporter? F you. Boom. Click. And so that's what started happening. And so what technology is doing to us is it is basically creating confirmation bias 2.0, which is horrible because it's making us much more entrenched in our viewpoints and much less open to conversations about differences.